They fought, bled and died for a cause that was not their own, and when victory came, they were forgotten. Over 1 million African soldiers served in World War II. They marched through the desert of North Africa, trekked through the jungles of Burma, and climbed the cold hills of Italy. They did not fight for power or land, but because they were called upon by colonial masters. Yet their names are rarely found in global history books. Today, we uncover the powerful story of the African soldiers of World War II, their bravery, the battles they fought, the betrayal they suffered, and the legacy they left behind. When World War II broke out in 1939, African colonies were not bystanders. They became essential manpower reserves for the European powers. Britain, France, Belgium, and Italy recruited heavily from their colonies across West, East, Central, and North Africa. Colonial governments launched large recruitment campaigns. In some areas, African men volunteered, drawn by promises of pay, travel, or recognition. But in many places, especially in French West Africa, conscription was forced. Local chiefs were pressured to meet quotas. Entire families were torn apart overnight. Major colonial units were expanded, including the King's African Rifle, the West African Frontier Force, the Tirailleurs Sénégalais, and the Sudan Defense Force. By 1945, British colony alone had sent nearly 500,000 troops, while French African territories added over 600,000 more. These men were told they were fighting for freedom and civilization, even though most of them had never experienced freedom in their own homelands. African troops were deployed to some of the toughest and most dangerous battlefields of the war. In the deserts of Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt, African soldiers fought under British and French command against Hitler's elite African Corps, led by General Rommel. Troops from Nigeria, Ghana, Sudan, Kenya, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia played crucial roles in battles that helped turn the tides in North Africa. At the Battle of El Alamein in 1943, African troops stood shoulder to shoulder with Allied forces in one of the war's most decisive moments. In the East African Campaign of 1940 to 1941, Africans helped liberate Ethiopia from Italian occupation. Ethiopian forces under Emperor Haile Selassie, along with troops from Sudan, Kenya, and South Africa, successfully pushed the Italians out of the region. It was a symbol of African resistance and pride. Thousands of West African soldiers from Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia were shipped to Burma in Southeast Asia. There, they faced harsh jungles, torrent terrains, deadly diseases, and unfamiliar terrains. They helped push back Japanese forces in key operations like the Battle of Kohima and the advance into Mandalay. Despite the difficult conditions, they fought with honor and discipline. Nigerian troops in particular made up a large portion of the 81st and 82nd West African divisions. These soldiers earned the nickname Burma Boys. Many of them were from the Yoruba and Hausa communities, which the British often classify as martial groups during recruitments. In Burma, they often relied on human porters instead of vehicles to move supplies, giving them an advantage in the rugged terrain. Their courage and adaptability impressed their commanders, even though they were rarely celebrated. African soldiers were also deployed to Europe. In Italy and southern France, they fought to liberate cities and towns occupied by the Nazis. The Tirailleurs Sénégalais were among the first troops to enter Marseille. Yet, during the liberation of Paris, these same African troops were deliberately removed from the celebratory parade. French command replaced them with white soldiers to give a whiter appearance in front of the cameras. The same men who had helped liberate France were not allowed to celebrate their freedom. These soldiers were not just numbers, they had names, families, and stories. One of the most notable was Charles Nchorere, a Gabonese officer and decorated World War I veteran. In 1940, he was captured by German forces in France. When he refused to be treated as a lower-ranked prisoner just because he was black, he was executed. His death symbolized the racism that many African soldiers faced, even while fighting the same enemy. Another hero was Aliou Ndiaye of Senegal, a brave member of the Tirailleurs. He fought in both France and Italy, but after the war, he returned home to poverty and neglect. The story was the same for many. These men gave everything but were met with silence. And the betrayal did not end there. After the war ended in 1945, African veterans returned home expecting compensation and respect. But what they got was injustice. In Senegal, a dark chapter unfolded in December 1944 at a camp near Dakar called Thiaroye. African soldiers protested for the unpaid wages and pensions. French forces responded with violence. They opened fire on the unarmed veterans, killing dozens. This became known as the Thiaroye Massacre. In British colonies, the stories was not much different. African veterans were paid less than the white counterparts. Many received no lands, no support, and no job opportunities. They came home heroes and were treated like strangers. Their courage had helped liberate Europe, but their own homelands remained under colonial control. This bitter reality became a turning point. Many veterans who had seen the hypocrisy of the colonial rule became involved in nationalist movements. They helped fuel the fight for African independence across the continent. Though history tried to forget them, their legacies lived on. The experience of African soldiers in World War II helped to reshape the political landscape of Africa. Countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, and Algeria would later rise to challenge colonial rule. Some of the veterans became political leaders. Others became symbols of strength for the next generation. In recent years, the world had begun to remember. In 2004, the French government issued a formal apology to the Tirailleurs Massacre. In 2021, the British government began reviewing unequal military burial practices for African troops. Statues, documentaries, and oral histories are slowly bringing their story back into the light. They stood tall when the world was at war. They crossed seas, faced bullets, endured racism, and shed their blood for a world they were never fully allowed to enjoy. The African soldiers of World War II were not just background players in someone else's stories. They were heroes. It is our duty to remember them, not just dumbly, but always, because history that forgot the brave is a lie.